In this thought paper, we're going to start exploring strategies for evaluating the quality of arguments. And before we jump into that, should probably do a little memory refresh on what exactly an argument is. What exactly is this thing that we're going to evaluate? So we've defined it as a group of statements in which one or more is claiming to provide reason for believing in or support for one of the other statements in that group. And those statements, the statement that we're providing that support for, the statement that we're saying we have reason to believe is true, that's our conclusion. That's the claim that we're advancing out into the discourse universe. And those statements that are doing the supporting, those statements that are claiming to be reasons for believing our conclusion is true, those are our premises. When we evaluate arguments, one of the first things we do is we look really closely at how the statements that make up the argument have been brought into relationship with one another, because we want to determine whether or not that relationship is reliable and trustworthy. And that's what we're going to start to look at with this thought primer. Broadly speaking, there's two kinds of argument, and you probably use both of them every day of your life, even if you do so without realizing it. When you go to the grocery store and you put a couple of apples in your cart, and then you decide, I needed 4 apples and I only have 2. I'm going to go back and add 2 more apples to my cart so that I have 4. You've just used deductive reasoning. Right? You know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And you don't have to then go and put 2 lemons in the basket and add 2 lemons to that to see if 2 plus 2 really does equal 4. You know that that 2 plus 2 always equals 4, no matter what the things are that you're adding together. Similarly, if you find yourself thinking things like, I just learned for certain that James is a bachelor, therefore he must be an unmarried male. Yeah, you know that it follows with certainty that James would be an unmarried male if it's true that he's a bachelor. And this is classic deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning deals with what we would call logically necessary conclusions. It deals in certainty. Okay, you don't have to go around doing a survey of all bachelors to find out if every single one of them is an unmarried male. You know that by definition, every bachelor is an unmarried male. Okay. On the other hand, when you go to your stats class and you're talking about probability and you're talking about the p factor, or you're in your bio lab and you're doing an experiment where you heat up the water that a goldfish is in, and then you decrease the temperature of the water the goldfish is in, and you notice that as the water increases, the fish moves around faster, and as the water temperature gets colder, the fish moves around slower. And you create this argument. You say, there must be some connection between the goldfish's metabolism and the water temperature, because when I increased the temperature, the fish moved faster. When I decreased the temperature, the fish moved slower. Now you're making an inductive kind of argument. Inductive arguments deal with probable conclusions, not logically necessary ones, and they deal with likelihood. Okay, so in your argument about the fish and the metabolism, your conclusion is probably true, and it will be more probably true, or the degree of likelihood will go up, the more times you do that experiment and achieve the same result. Okay, so now take a look at these two arguments. One of them is inductive and one of them is deductive. And what I'd like you to do is pause your video real quick and see if by our definitions of deductive and inductive arguments you can figure out which of these is the inductive one and which one is the deductive one. So go ahead and pause your video, and when you're ready to rock and roll, unpause your video. All right. I saw Jane carrying a surfboard and wetsuit at College Cove last summer, therefore Jane must be a surfer. This is an inductive argument. Okay, if it is true that you saw Jane carrying a surfboard and wetsuit at College Cove last summer, it makes sense that it's likely that Jane is a surfer. Not many people who aren't surfers don't walk around at the beach carrying a surfboard and wetsuit. But it's not logically necessary that Jane be a surfer just because you saw her carrying a surfboard and wetsuit at the beach. Maybe she was carrying it for a friend. Maybe she just purchased it from somebody to give as a gift to somebody else. But there's lots of different ways that the conclusion of this argument wouldn't follow, even if the premise statement were true. Now, of course, you can make the conclusion more likely true. You can increase its probability by adding in additional reasons and evidence here. So for example, if we not only saw Jane tooling around College Cove with the surfboard and wetsuit in hand, but we saw Jane surfing, and we know a friend of Jane's who is her surfing partner who told us, yes, Jane has been surfing every Saturday for the last 10 years. Now the likelihood that our conclusion that Jane is a surfer is going up. We're stacking on more reasons to believe that it's true that Jane must be a surfer. But it's never going to be 100% necessary for her to be a surfer based on these observations. However, take a look at the second argument. Everyone who has ever been to College Cove carrying a surfboard is a surfer. And I saw Jane at College Cove and I saw Jane at College Cove carrying a surfboard last summer, therefore Jane must be a surfer. This is a deductive argument, because if, and this is a big if, but if it's true that everyone who has ever been to College Cove carrying a surfboard is a surfer, and it's also true that you saw Jane at College Cove with that surfboard, then it has to be true. It has to be true that Jane must be a surfer. Okay? Now remember, I said if the premises are true. Okay, if it's true that everyone who's ever been to College Cove carrying a surfboard is a surfer, and if it's true you saw Jane carrying that surfboard there, then it has to be true. You can be 100% certain about it. But with the argument above, it never has to be certain that Jane must be a surfer if all we're doing is piling on observations of Jane's behavior or reports from Jane's friends. So that's our inductive argument. All right, so I want you to take a look at these arguments here, okay? Each one of these is an argument, and some of them are inductive and some of them are deductive. And what I want you to do, you guessed it, pause your video, and I want you to determine which of these is inductive and which is deductive. And when you're ready to rock and roll, you can go ahead and restart that video, and make sure you're pausing your video and doing this. This is the fun part of the course where you get to immediately see if your thinking is on track. All right. Let's take a look at what we've got here. Because the sun rose every previous day will also rise tomorrow. That is an inductive argument, okay? It's inductive because it actually relies on something called the naturalistic fallacy. That the claim is that because something has occurred every day previous to this day, the same thing will occur the next day. Well, maybe, or maybe the sun explodes. Right? Or some weird thing happens in the universe that causes the sun to not rise tomorrow. So that makes it an inductive argument because it relies on probability. Do I think the sun's going to come up tomorrow? Yeah. Am I really confident in that? Yes, I am. Am I certain about it? Well, no, I can't be certain about it because I don't know. Anything could happen. Put it that way. Number two, though, is a deductive argument. Okay, the premise is Jen is cold and Jan is warm, therefore Jan is warm and Jen is cold. And what you'll notice is that the premise statement, Jen is cold and Jan is warm, is simply the same thing as the conclusion statement with the statements switched positions. Okay, so the two statements just kind of flip their positions on the side of that and you know, even if you're not consciously aware of it, that you know that a statement that does that with the word and or the word or, it means the same thing. When I say to you, either it's raining outside or it's not raining outside, and then I say to you, either it's not raining outside or it's raining outside, you know I'm saying the same thing. There's no way that one of those statements could be true and the other could be false because they seem to be saying the exact same thing. And because we can be certain that this conclusion statement would be true if this premise statement is true, that tells us it's a deductive argument. Number three is also a deductive argument, right? Because the first statement is either Jake is a CR student or Jake is a CPH student. I'll never get used to that CPH thing. Anyway, either Jake is a CR student or Jake is a CPH student. Jake is not a CPH student, therefore Jake is a CR student. This is a deductive argument because that conclusion has to be true. There is no way for it to be false if those two premise statements are true, right? Because if it's true that either Jake is a CR student or Jake is a CPH student, and it's also true that Jake is not a CPH student, well, then in order for that first statement to have been true, Jake has to be a CR student, and that's exactly what the conclusion says. So this is a deductive argument. If the two premise statements are true, there is no way for that conclusion to be false. We can be certain it will also be true. Number 4, though, is an inductive argument. Denny's offers hamburgers as an option because it includes hamburgers on its menu. Okay, is it likely that Denny's offers hamburgers if they've got them on the menu? Yeah, it's pretty likely. Is it certain? No. Maybe they ran out of hamburger. So the menu has an item list. I mean, this isn't uncommon or unheard of. The menu has items that they're not able to serve. They're out of that option on a particular day. Okay, so number 4 is an inductive argument. Now, in our course, we're going to look pretty exclusively at deductive kinds of arguments. Okay, so we're going to leave the inductive reasoning. We'll leave that to Philosophy 1, the critical thinking course. And we're going to focus on the formal logic of deductive reasoning and looking at deductive arguments and how to evaluate them.